Hello and welcome back to On the Brink with Castle Island. I'm Nick Carter. So this is the third episode in our crypto dollarization series, and I hope you've enjoyed it so far. I certainly have enjoyed making it. So today's episode covers a country that's very well known to Bitcoiners. It's the prototypical case of hyperinflation leading to an effective state collapse. So Venezuela was once one of the richest countries in Latin America, and it's been reduced to a state of poverty through mismanagement, poor governance, and of course, hyperinflation. So there's a few monetary phenomena occurring in Venezuela all at once. So first of all, due to hyperinflation, you have the effective digitization of the bolivar, since it's not efficient to print larger and larger denominations of bills. The government simply cannot keep up. Then you have this informal dollarization movement, which has actually accelerated in recent months for reasons we'll cover in the episode. And then you have the extremely peculiar petro product, which is still ongoing. And then you have the rise to prominence of non-state currencies like Bitcoin. Now, Bitcoiners like to claim the case of Venezuela as vindication for their cause. Local Bitcoin's volumes are certainly very high in Venezuela relative to other countries, but there's more to the story. So to untangle the mess of the petro, the bolivar, the dollar, Bitcoin, and a host of other currencies filling various niches in Venezuela, I found one of the genuine subject matter experts on the topic. So I've followed Alejandro Machado's work for a while. He's done some really great stuff at the Open Money Initiative, and I wanted to get him on the show to break down some of these issues. Why is Venezuela dollarizing now? How are cryptocurrencies intertwined with remittances? How do they fit into that picture? Who is trading on local Bitcoins? And something I've really wondered about for a while, why is Zelle so popular in Venezuela? So in this wide-ranging conversation, we cover all these topics, many of which I feel Bitcoiners are sometimes naive about. So I really enjoyed this conversation. It cleared a lot of these topics up for me, and I hope you enjoy it as well.
Brought down by bad mortgage investments, Lehman, which has 25,000 employees, will be liquidated.
The federal government loans American International Group, AIG, $85 billion.
This is a different kind of market, and the Fed is asleep.
The federal government is stepping in to stabilize Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the two mortgage giants that have been threatened by the housing crisis.
The Bank of England has pumped £75 billion more into Britain's ailing economy with a new round of quantitative easing.
You print a couple $1 trillion, and all of a sudden, people start to worry. So out of this worry, we have something called the Bitcoin.
Welcome back to the On the Brink podcast with Castle Island. I'm Nick Carter, and I have the pleasure of having Alejandro Machado on the show today. Alejandro is the head of research at Value, and he is the co-founder of the Open Money Initiative. Alejandro, thanks so much for joining the show today.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
So you are dialing in from Bogota, correct?
That's right, Bogota, Colombia.
We have a lot to talk about. The main reason I wanted to talk to you is because I'm exploring this concept of crypto dollarization, which is a made-up concept which didn't exist until recently, but it seems to be happening in Venezuela potentially. And you are a local subject matter expert, and I definitely want to dig into that in the way that Bitcoin and dollars are flowing in Venezuela. Before that, though, I'd love to just talk about how you came to be interested in cryptocurrency and, what Bitcoin means to you personally.
Sure. So, quick recap. I am a computer engineer from Universidad Simón Bolívar. So I studied there. It's a technical university in Venezuela. And, I was always interested in technology, and I read Hacker News like obsessively every day. And I think it probably came up in one of the posts, and I read about it, forgot about it. I wasn't really interested in fintech very much. I was much more into educational tech and other stuff. But I remember I read about it maybe, 2011, 2012. But when I really took an interest was when the government started talking about the petro, like the Venezuelan government tried to release their own cryptocurrency, and it's still, kind of in the works. It's kind of a database that doesn't really work well. But, I thought this is outrageous, right? This is something that goes against the ethos of what a cryptocurrency should be and what Bitcoin stands for, because I had read about it before, and I wasn't feeling this is the future of money back then. This was in 2018, like early 2018. I wasn't like thrilled about it. I hadn't learned enough about it, but I thought, this is like what they're trying to do, because the government of Venezuela is really evil. They tried, I thought they were trying to do something completely outrageous, which was to control the monetary system completely. And that struck me as something, that was really bad. And I started learning more about, what is the alternative? What can we do, or what can Venezuelans do to counteract this? Because we already have another currency, the local currency, the Bolivar, which, at the time was in very high inflation, and it then became hyperinflationary. And so we were, the government was trying to replace it with another currency that they could completely control. And so I went to like the opposite side. So what if we had money that no single entity could control, and what would that look like? I mean, and already this existed, right? And so I just started learning more about it and getting more into it.
And so when did you start transacting with Bitcoin, or would you consider yourself more of a cryptocurrency pluralist in terms of not being particularly wedded to a single one?
Well, I do prefer using and learning more about Bitcoin, because it is the currency that started. It is the first cryptocurrency. It is the most stable in the sense of, network effects and people interested in it. And, the rules are very strict, and the minority or like the people who are the core of the community are very intolerant to change. And I think that's a valuable thing. I think that, making changes to monetary policy here and there can result in the opposite of what cryptocurrency was created for. So I do like experiments like Ethereum, and perhaps like some of the newer cryptocurrencies that we were learning about, like Grin, and but I think that Bitcoin is the most interesting one from a monetary perspective, because of the way that the hash power is the highest. We know that it is the most likely to be unchangeable over time, and it's just very powerful. It's a very powerful concept, and I don't think it's going to be replaced anytime soon.
So do you see it primarily as a monetary innovation, or as a tech innovation, or are they kind of inescapably linked? You need the tech to have the monetary traits.
Well, I think both. Like, if you don't have the technological infrastructure to support it, then of course you can't use it. But the good news is you don't have to mine to use it. You don't have to have like a huge computer. Now with the Lightning Network, I was just trying out this past weekend at a birthday party, and we collected using the Lightning Network. We were using Wallet of Satoshi, and I think it's a semi-custodial service, but it was very fast, and we were able to gather donations for a food hall in Venezuela. And it was just like a very powerful thing to be able to collect money, boom, 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 and then send it over to Venezuela, which is a closed monetary system where you can't really transact, you can't really send money into Venezuela unless you do it with a innovation like this, or if you have a contact that has already local currency, then it gets complicated. So I think that what's interesting is that Bitcoin is itself very unchanging, or like the core rules are there, but there's innovation happening on top. And I think that even in the case of Venezuela, where we don't have the best tech, we don't have the best infrastructure, electricity goes out, the internet goes out, especially in the rural areas. I think that you can make it so that it's resilient. You can have money in Venezuela that is more resilient to infrastructural collapse. Maybe Bitcoin, being digital, it has these limitations, but there's some innovation happening around it. There are some people working on offline Bitcoin transactions. You could do it over radio, since it's not tied to the technology per se. Like, you don't really have to use the internet to use Bitcoin. There's a project called Locha Mesh by Randy Brito, who also runs. He's the person that runs this food hall that I mentioned, and he's trying to get more people to use Bitcoin in Venezuela by using very low cost devices, which is a very, very long shot. But I think it's a very interesting experiment. And the dollar bill is the money that is most resilient in Venezuela and the most useful today. And you can't beat the technology of the physical dollar bill. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right now in Venezuela, that is what works. It works everywhere. It works every time. Provided that it's not a crumpled bill, that it's not because the people have started to become paranoid about bills that don't look fresh because they're deteriorating, and some of them may be fake. But as long as you can verify that, verify that the bill is legit, then it is the money that works best. But I think that having innovation in this space of digital technology in a place like Venezuela, where people are already used to transacting with money digitally, because the bolivar, the national currency, has been digital for a very long time, because the government doesn't want to print new bills because that's expensive, and they have to print more and more and more. Of course, it's better to hit the button and print 100 million units rather than actually have to physically print them. So people in Venezuela are used to digital payments in many ways, and I think it's a very, very ripe space for innovation and for using digital currency.
So before the call, we were talking a little bit about how your parents and grandparents had always prioritized dollars in terms of denominating their savings accounts. So that's kind of the big overarching theme here, that, potentially crypto is going to rekindle a spate of dollarization. I'd love just to hear about your family's history saving in dollars.
Sure. So I was mentioning my grandparents from my dad's side were the first of their families to go to college. They were able to do so because of very generous social policies that Venezuela had because of the oil revenue. This was in the early 60s, and they went to college for free, and they were able to make a better life for them and their families. And I remember my grandfather used to save in dollars, and my dad did too. And from my mom's side is Spanish. They were Spanish immigrants, and they came to Venezuela also to seek a better life. And I remember that they too were saving in dollars, because there was always a perception that the local currency, even though maybe it was more stable in the 60s and 70s, I think after, like in the 80s, or perhaps a little bit before, inflation was relatively high. And I remember when I was growing up in the 90s, inflation was still like 30% year over year, which is unthinkable in a developed country. So why if you're part of the middle class, and if you're professional, you know the world, you've traveled other places, and you can open bank accounts in other places, why would you stick your money in a currency that depreciates 30% every year, where you can have a much better alternative? There shouldn't be this barrier to saving, and this is not something that should be exclusive to the middle class. It should be open for everyone. But of course, there are knowledge gaps and there are capability gaps that I think are getting eroded with the internet and with digital money. But going back to the family's history, I think, and this is like the case for I would say almost all of the middle class in Venezuela, and even among the classes, everyone in Venezuela is aware of the fact that the dollar is valuable, and it's a desirable thing to have. Even though if you don't have a bank account, then you might stash some dollars under the mattress, and you can have that as your savings, emergency savings, right? And so now this problem or this situation where the bolivar, the local currency, is not valuable, has become extremely polarizing, or extremely, it's become more extreme in the sense that it's not 30% inflation anymore. It's about 1,000,000%. It was about 1,000,000%, I think, a couple of years ago. And now hyperinflation is showing signs of being tamed a little bit because of dollarization, because people are using the dollar and they're just skipping the bolivar altogether. But it's something that the government or the policies that the government has had of printing money have run their course, and people are just sick of it, and they're moving to another currency.
And has there been anything specific which changed recently because now we're seeing articles in the press. There's this great publication called the Caracas Chronicles, which I read pretty frequently. Bloomberg actually covers it too. We're seeing articles about popular dollarization, as Larry White puts it. So kind of bottom-up dollarization.
Right.
Has anything in particular changed, or has it just been a sense of exhaustion about not wanting to tolerate the bolivar anymore?
Well, that's a very interesting phenomenon that happened last year. There was a big blackout that lasted for about 4 days in most of the country, and in other places, this isn't Caracas, where the power almost never goes out because the ruling class is there, and there's elites there, and they want to keep the electricity flowing there all the time. But this time, the government just messed up so badly that the power was out for 4 days. And so what happened
including in Caracas.
Including Caracas, yes.
Yeah.
And what happened was that people were very afraid of breaking the rules that the government has been building for, decades, of monetary controls, of capital controls, of not being able to exchange the money without the permission of the government. Even saying dollars in Venezuela is kind of a bad word. They say divisa, which means, it's like a foreign currency. They use that as an euphemism for dollars. So it's very interesting that, and very terrible that people were afraid of even having their dollars out in the open, because if a police sees it, even if it's not directly against the law to pay in dollars, because it's really not. What was against the law was to exchange money without permission from the government, which is also outrageous. But the law, what the text of the law says matters, or should matter. The police can just take your money and say, "Oh, this is illegal. I'm just going to seize it," right? And since that didn't happen, the blackout happened, and there was no way to pay for those 4 days if you wanted to pay for something.
Because
yes,
the bolivar at that point was effectively digital, right?
Right, exactly. Because there was cash scarcity all over the place. Like the only bills that you could get were very small. You could use the bills to pay for public transportation, for example. The banks would only give you, like $1 worth of money each day. If you wanted to go to the ATM, the ATM wasn't working, but you go to your bank branch, and they would hand you about $1 worth of bolivars, and that could do you for the day. So anything else that you wanted to buy, you needed to buy it with digital money, with digital bolivars, which usually means debit cards. Venezuela is a country that is mostly banked. About 75% of people have a bank account. And so they have debit cards, and mostly they work. You can use them if the banking network is up. But of course, during the blackout, it wasn't. So the only way to pay was to use dollars, and dollars cash. So it turned out that a lot of people had dollars cash, surprise, surprise. And they started to pay each other with that. And then, there was no government backlash. And I think the government had been working on easing their policies before, but they couldn't prove to the public that they were really serious about not persecuting the use of dollars. So people are really afraid. But the blackout, I think, kind of forced people into using dollars. And then when they realized, oh, there's no wolf, the danger's not here, like you can actually use dollars, then it started gradually, the country started gradually moving towards using more and more dollars.
So the blackout was a catalytic moment where the window of acceptability opened, and normal folks realized that they wouldn't be prosecuted for transacting in dollars.
Exactly. Yes, that's what I think.
That's fascinating that you can pinpoint these catalysts, but I had noticed an uptick in the coverage around dollarization there, and I suppose there often is a catalyst because it has to take. It's kind of a collective action problem. You kind of need everybody to switch over at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when there's the element of fear, then I think it takes like a big shock like this to be able to. For people to be able to get their heads together and change the way that they're behaving. Yeah.
How did people get access to physical dollars in Venezuela? Was it through something like tourism or trade? I'm trying to think how actual physical dollars would make their way into Venezuela.
Well, I think for many years, there was this government policy, there was this government body called CADIVI that essentially determined who got access to foreign currency and who didn't. And the government used this as a political tool to control and to decide who got the money from the state. Because, I mean, we were in the oil boom. I think there were about like $800 billion that flowed into Venezuela, and most of it now is gone, is unaccounted for. We don't know where it is. It's all gone to corrupt funds and God knows where. But a lot of it, or maybe, you know, like these are numbers that are very, very hard to determine, but some of that money was given to people in the means in the way of subsidies, right? So they started subsidizing, for example, travel abroad, so you could get an allowance of, let's say, $3,000 a year, where you could, you know, get that money, some part of that money physically and part of that money as a credit card allowance, because your credit card wouldn't work. Your Venezuelan credit card doesn't work abroad unless you have express permission from the government to use your bolivars abroad, because they controlled the exchange rate. And if, you know, everyone was able to spend their money freely, of course the peg would break. And eventually the peg did break, of course, but in order to hold it, and in order for them to control who has access and who doesn't, they did this. And I think most of the money that was spent or was wasted there was gone to shell companies and, you know, fake companies that invoiced and supposedly imported a lot of goods and food to Venezuela, because we've been a country that imports a lot of our food, because we have oil, and so we have the Dutch disease, right? So I think that during those years, you know, from 2003, when they instituted these exchange controls, to 2015, 16 or so, there were relatively easy ways to get access to some dollars, at least, because if you like brought your requirements to the bank and showed that you were going to use the dollars for this or for that, you know, they didn't have a way to check, you know, if you were going to use the money for this or for that. So a lot of people, you know, trying to get out of the Bolivar, they started saving some of that money in dollars, and they got them cheap, right? They got them at favorable rates. And so, and also a lot of people just did arbitrage with this. They just bought the cheap dollars and they sold in the black market, and then they bought cheap dollars again because they had government connections, and they sold it again. So a lot of people got rich this way. And a lot of people also got rich through the inflation, because you could get like a huge loan from a Venezuelan bank in bolivars, and then you could pay it off, you know, the next year at like, you know, maybe 2% of what it was worth because of inflation. Like it had driven down the currency to 2% of its value. Now this happened like a year or two ago. So there were ways to get dollars into the hands, into families' hands, and people just took advantage of these ways that you could do it, and you could have some physical dollars. So, you know, it obviously the levels of savings varies, and the level of access to foreign banking also varies, but it is the case that most people in Venezuela today, I think, have at least some access to dollars. And maybe, you know, the majority of Venezuela is not wealthy at the moment. We used to be a wealthy country, not anymore. But, you know, people still have a stash that they keep, you know, at least $5, $10, something. Everyone has a little bit of an emergency fund in dollars.
Okay, that makes sense. That's interesting. This concept of taking out a loan, and due to inflation, it depreciates. I'm curious why banks would be issuing those loans. Was there some sort of government decree that they be lending money, or? Because it seems like if the counterparty is getting rich, then the bank is losing money.
Yeah, I think when that happened, the year that happened, I mean, it's hard to keep track because the government keeps changing policies all the time. But I think banks were mandated to give loans back then, and I think it's because a lot of the clients of the banks were people that had gotten wealthy with, you know, ill-begotten money, and they just wanted to multiply their money, and this is a very easy way to do it. So banks were forced to essentially issue these loans. And then when the state was broke, then they could no longer force banks to do this, because they would like definitely break the entire system, and they obviously couldn't afford to do that. So they changed, and now credit is very, very limited in Venezuela. Like credit cards in Venezuela are limited to like $1 or something. That's like the limit. Like the highest limit of credit card you can find in Venezuela today is about $1 or $2. And this is very, very different from, you know, 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, where you could have still access to some credit and some cheap credit.
So this mandate that existed for a while to force banks to create loans, that was effectively a way for Venezuelan elites to plunder the balance sheets of the banks, I guess in concert with inflation.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the definition of the Cantillon effect, I think, whereby the spoils of inflation percolate unevenly through society. With those who have the best access to the money spigot, they do the best, and then everybody else does the worst.
Yeah, and I think, so these people that had access to the loans maybe were, the second in the second best position, but definitely the best position was to be at the head of the central bank, because you could essentially issue money to yourself, and you could get. I mean, I don't know if this is actually the way that people did it, but if I were the central bank and I were like an evil, person that wanted to control or wanted to just get rich off of the state, why not give myself the bolivars first before it even percolates into the economy, even before people are aware that there's more bolivars circulating, and then I just sell them with at the black market rate, and then eventually the economy catches up and the price rises, but I'm already rich. I already got the money. So
and there's effectively a delay there, so that's where you're exploiting.
Yeah. If you were in charge of the central bank and you could decide where the money is printed to, I think you could do that. You could definitely profit like loads from that, even more than the people who are connected to the commercial banks and could get access to loans.
So, in terms of this dollarization, I know you're not in Venezuela right now, but you're quite nearby. So, and you probably have reasonably good data on this. What fraction of the transactional economy would you estimate is currently dollarized? Is it even possible to get these kind of estimates?
Yeah, so Bloomberg has reported on this, and I think there are some methodologies that get close to the number. Obviously, it's a very, very hard thing to research, and especially in a place like Venezuela where it is hard to research to begin with. But I do speak with Venezuelans, and I do keep track of the way things are going, and the pollsters and everything. So I think the number I remember is about 60% of trade or transactions are being conducted in dollars. That's the estimation in places like Caracas. In a city of Western Venezuela called Maracaibo, the second biggest city, actually where my grandparents are from. The blackouts have been so severe, and it's kind of ironic because this is where the oil, like the big oil fields used to be or still are. There are oil fields everywhere in Venezuela, but this is a state that was producing a lot of oil, and a lot of our electricity comes from thermoelectric and oil related sources. Most of it actually comes from the hydroelectric plant in the southeast of the country, so it's very far away. But there have been some attempts at generating electricity from oil. So this oil rich state has been the hardest hit by the blackouts because it's just very hard to transport electricity. I mean, it's very far away, right? Like these are like long distances, and the further you are, and the worse the government, it's just harder to maintain the power plants and the infrastructure, the power lines, to get the electricity to this far away state. So in this state, I think they estimated it that the dollar transactions, because of what we discussed earlier, because the people have no other way to pay except in physical cash, and physical cash essentially means dollars in Venezuela today, is about 85% or more. So there are some places where there's more dollar transactions, some places where there's less. I would assume that in places that are very, very poor, that don't have easy access to dollars as much as in the rest of the country, they still use bolivars, and things are still at a price that is not consistent with the rest of the country. So there may be a little bit more cash going around, but at this point, people are paying with dollar. The dollar you can use everywhere, and people are paying sometimes with gold. There's a lot of illegal mining of gold in the southeast of the country, this state where I mentioned, where electricity kind of mostly comes from. We we have like very, very beautiful, lush national parks that are there that, are part of the Amazon. And it's like pristine and amazing. And, the government's kind of plundering all of this because the oil revenue is no longer enough. They don't have competent people, neither in the electricity sector or in the oil sector. People are leaving and they don't want to be associated with the government. So, and since they control all of these industries, people are in these states and in these areas. They're doing illegal gold mining. They're doing like illegal narco trade and then this and that. So they have like alternative sources of revenue, and so people are paying each other with like grams of gold or maybe even cocaine or Brazilian reals, which are close to the border, near the border with Colombia. They're paying with Colombian pesos. So there's a lot of different ways that you can exchange value without using the bolivar. But the bolivar remains the currency that is the most widespread, and that this is why still people use it and use the electronic form of it.
Oh, that's fascinating. So we have not just the dollar as an alternative currency, but a whole host of other potential currencies: the real, the Colombian peso.
But these are way more regional and more limited. If you want to pay in Venezuela anywhere, you have to use you can use the US dollar. You don't really have to. If you have the right amount of bolivars, you can buy most things, except like big ticket items, for example. And this has been the case for a long time. If you wanted to buy an apartment or if you want to buy a car, you typically have a document that says the amount in bolivars, but you rip it apart and you actually do the transaction in dollars. Like you rip the check. Like you don't actually conduct the transaction in bolivars, but you conduct it in dollars. And
how would it work though for a big ticket item that you would have to finance, for instance, or is it much more limited in terms of you would just have to stump up 100% of the cash up front?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know how my parents bought their apartment, because I'm pretty sure that they had to borrow money for it. I think back then maybe the down payment was in dollars and then you could ask the bank for the rest. And there was a mix of both currencies. But I think now, if you don't have the money up front, I don't think you can buy an apartment anymore.
Yeah, so I guess that's one way that inflation really ravages the society. It eliminates the predictability which is required for these longer term transactions which require financing. I guess no one would be willing to lend. So you just don't have the opportunity to finance things, which is kind of robs society of its productive capital.
Yeah, you can't trust the future.
That's a good way to put it. So given that other states in Latin America have dollarized, and in some cases successfully, I would say, Ecuador is probably, some would consider it a success story. There are strong welfare gains which accrued to citizens. Post-dollarization, inflation was stabilized. It seems to be doing relatively well. Are you optimistic now that Venezuela seems to have turned the corner and gone for at least partial dollarization? Is this cause for optimism, or is that just hard to find these days?
Well, so it is. That's a great question, and it's something that I think about all the time, because in Venezuela right now, things seem to be getting slightly better. I mean, the economic opening has created opportunities for businesses to open and for people to flourish in some limited ways. But we have to remember that the government's still in power. There's very, very authoritarian government still in power, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to retain that power. And so, for example, they're starting to tax transactions that are not they're putting an additional tax on transactions that are not in bolivars or petros. So if you are, this is like really hard to enforce, right? Because you would have to have auditors everywhere in the country, but they still can access the means of violence to coerce people into doing things, and they still have the element of fear, right? Like the same fear that prevented people from saying or from transacting dollars in the first place, that is still intact. They still have the armed forces with them. They still have local power and local sources of money that fund this terror and this power. So and you have to remember that dollarization is not the same in Ecuador as in Venezuela, because it's not official, right? Like Maduro
Right.
has welcomed dollarization, if you will. That he's even said on TV that he appreciates it, because it's palpable in the streets. You can see that people are getting slightly better, because there are some things that a stable currency gives you, even if the country is not doing super well, and it's not. Like Venezuela is at, I think, 1944 GDP per capita levels at the moment, which is insane. We've regressed to 1944. But, people feel this, feeling that, you can trust a little bit more of the future because you have a stable currency, and because, prices still rise, and there is uncertainty. And this is why still there is high inflation, even with dollarization. But I think most of the uncertainty comes from the people in power. What are they going to do next? What is going to be the next control? So, for example, people they can't trust their money to be in bank accounts, and this is going to be the next problem in Venezuela, and it's already happening now. You can have dollars under your mattress, or you can stash dollars in vaults, but you can't really trust banks to keep your money for you. And it's not because of the banks; it's because of the government. At any time, the government can decide, okay, all these dollars that you deposited, they're going to be converted into petros, so good luck with that. Or they're going to be converted to bolivars, or they're going to be whatever. Like, we're going to take for 30% of it because of a new tax, whatever. They can do whatever they
you
want.
won't be able to withdraw your dollars from the bank branch. Yeah, so they'll effectively be confiscated.
Exactly. There is no trust in the banking system in this way. And it's, again, not because of the banking system. There are some fantastic banks in Venezuela, but because of the regulator and what is on top of the banks controlling the financial system. So a parallel financial system is obviously very interesting. And this is the exact reason why I got into Bitcoin and into cryptocurrency. It's because what if you have a government that is actively hostile against society and against people's ability to hold money and to use money? Then you're better off relying on a system that doesn't depend on the government's ability to shut it down.
Through using Bitcoin, you effectively import a system of property rights, which are actually credible, actually trustworthy.
Yes, as long as you can use it. It's a big barrier for most people. They're not used to controlling their keys and transacting with just a phone and keeping track of the money that they have in different places. And it's still not something that is in the mental model of most people. And I work with this directly because I'm a product designer, and I'm working now at this company Value, doing research. So after I did computer science, I did a master's in human computer interaction. So this is the core of what I do every day, is to try to understand how people relate to technology and how we can make it easier to use. And it is a fact that Bitcoin is still not very easy to use. And that's not the only problem. Like, people always cite this, there's a problem with usability, but there's also a problem about liquidity. And so the problem with liquidity is that people don't trust, they don't know enough, and they don't trust it enough to use it as a credible alternative. They have the dollar, and people, for decades, and getting used to new forms of money, I think, is something that takes decades. And for decades at least, people have seen the dollar as that standard that they can look up to and say, okay, this is what a stable currency looks like. And so I think that people in Venezuela are starting to see the benefits of belonging or having a foot in other systems. And that other system doesn't necessarily have to be Bitcoin, right? It can be, for example, there's a lot of people in Venezuela, not a lot, but about the 5% of people who still are kind of middle class and getting by, or maybe are owners of big companies, private companies that has still been tolerated by government, or they've been they've been able to make do with crazy rules that the government has imposed. And these people have bank accounts abroad, like my parents, my grandparents, they try to open accounts elsewhere. And so you can transact in another system. You can have a bank account in the US. And if you also have a bank account in the US, I can send you money in the US banking system. And that is something that the government of Venezuela cannot control. They probably don't even know that it's happening unless they start really filtering, like seeing what packets go on their local networks and so on.
Yeah.
But it's the idea that you it's actually, we were talking about this on Twitter, I think yesterday. It was an interesting debate with Peter McCormack and other people that got into the action. I think Eric Wall was also there. People do care about censorship resistant money. They just don't know that they care about censorship resistant money. And for them, using Zelle, using like the banking system in the US is a way to hold dollars electronically in this case that the government cannot confiscate. So I would rather keep my money in a US bank account or a European bank account or a Panamanian bank account rather than holding in a local bank account where I can't really do anything with it, because I know that even though the government can give me assurances over time that they will not confiscate and so on, they always have a history of doing so. And so why would I trust them this time? And so that, the dollar abroad, or the banking system abroad that you can trust, like if you trust the US banking system, which a lot of people do, then this is a way to have censorship resistant money. Another way is to have cash, right? Like who's going to censor your cash transactions? It's practically impossible. And another way to do it is to have Bitcoin. And this is a way that you can move money in and out of Venezuela without necessarily having, like, what if I don't have a US bank account? I've never been able to travel to the US. I don't have a US visa, but there is this asset that is on the internet that I can access because there are platforms like local Bitcoins, that let me trade locally between people, between the local banking system and a system that the state cannot control, which is the Bitcoin network. So that is very, very powerful thing.
Yeah, one thing that you mentioned is so interesting. It reminds me of other episodes of dollarization, which failed, is this notion of the local banks not being trustworthy or being plundered, not because of a problem with the banks per se, but because the government uses them as a piggy bank, essentially. This also happened in Zimbabwe, where you had a dollarization episode. People took dollars and put them in the bank, and then the Zimbabwe government converted them into IOUs.
The Zoller.
Yeah, the Zoller, and it traded at 60
Hilarious.
cents on the dollar. It wasn't exactly a dollar. You couldn't withdraw your dollar, so it was kind of a one-way ticket, like a Hotel California, you can check in, but you can never leave.
It was a government stable coin that was not so stable.
Yeah, effectively, a tether with very weak assurances.
Right.
And so, one thing that this makes me wonder about is the potential for stablecoin infiltration, perhaps, because in that case you have a dollar claim, or essentially a dollar IOU, which is a claim on an overseas bank account. And it's, using the public key cryptography similar to Bitcoin. It's a very strong claim, and you can custody it, on your phone.
Right.
But it seems that there's very, very little uptake for any stable coins in Venezuela right now. I'm curious as to your views on that and why that might be.
Yeah. So when it comes to cryptocurrency in Venezuela, Bitcoin is king. Bitcoin has a volume of about, I want to say, $5 million a week, I think, in just in local Bitcoins. Of course, there are trading groups that are private and we can't know how much they transact, but it's a pretty healthy volume for a country of 30 million people. And, there is correlation between the volume of local Bitcoins in Venezuela and in Colombia. And they're working on a piece with Matt Alberg, we're going to publish under the Open Money Initiative, that basically shows, these correlations and very interesting observations about how Bitcoin is actually being used for remittances, right? And I think that, Bitcoin was, again, the first cryptocurrency and has been around for the longest, and people have become used to trading it, and they've become used to the platforms that support it. So there's a lot of people in Venezuela that don't know how to use a wallet, but they know how to use local Bitcoins. They know only how to use that, and they use that as their way to make money. So they can convert from Bitcoin into Bolivars very quickly. It takes like 5 minutes. I've sent money to my family in 5 minutes using local Bitcoins. It's super easy if you know how to do it. And so there's people that don't know anything else about it. They just use that. So local Bitcoins since it only supports Bitcoin, and it's such a great product, really. Like if you know how to use it, if you can use a desktop computer, there are many ways that they could improve it, and they could make it more mobile friendly. They could open it up for more people, like reduce the complexity. But it works for a specific niche, and if you're in that niche, you're golden. And so since Bitcoin is this a Bitcoin only product, there's a lot of limitation to other cryptocurrencies, the way that they can be used. So I think one thing is the protocols that you can use, and another thing is the products that support the protocols, which is actually what people care about. People don't care about protocols, they care about products. So if you had products in Venezuela that used stablecoins, reliable, very like trustworthy stablecoins that over time could become liquid, you could gradually work on stablecoin adoption in Venezuela. And I know that many of the people that trade Bitcoin are trading Tether right now, and Tether, it's also because it's very easy to convert into Bitcoin and not, and some of these people don't care about how shady Tether might be. So
Right.
there is some adoption of that in that sense, and some people maybe trade Tethers for Zelle dollars or Panama dollars or whatever. So there is a little bit of that, but there hasn't been a moment or a stable coin that has claimed the throne yet, and it's interesting. I think it's an opportunity. I think, if people can reliably convert a dollar stable digital asset into bolivars and vice versa, or maybe not, it's not into bolivars, maybe it's a thing that you have to work on merchant adoption. If people are starting to accept it as money, as they, like some merchants accept Zelle as money and accept Panama bank accounts, for example. Like if I do a transaction with you, or maybe even like in Caracas, there's a Chinese community and they pay each other with WeChat, right? So there are many ways to transact outside the Venezuelan banking system. And so if you can make it so that people in Venezuela can access a foreign jurisdiction or a virtual jurisdiction, be it with a stable coin that's based on Bitcoin and Bitcoin futures, for example, what Abra was trying to do, or be it DAI, or be it whatever it is, there needs to be like a reliable and consistent effort from companies like that are getting, like, looking to get into this business, to actually make adoption, like quote unquote, the thing that we're always kind of striving for. And if you want that, if you want people to be able to access, there needs to be a concerted effort to do it. And I think we're starting to see the seeds of that, and it's going to be, and it's a very interesting year in that sense.
So I often hear Zelle mentioned in the context of Venezuela, and this is shocking to me because in the U.S., like, everybody makes fun of Zelle. It's like, oh, I don't know anyone that's ever used Zelle. Like, this consortium of big banks. They spend all this money on ads, and like nobody uses Zelle. In the U.S., I think Venmo and Cash App are probably the most popular peer-to-peer networks. Obviously, they don't really work abroad. What is it about Zelle in particular that has captured the imagination of the, I guess it'd probably be more Venezuelan middle class folks, which use it?
Well, so you know what? I think in Venezuela, I've used Venmo to pay, and young people can use Venmo, like they, it's hip and cool, and you can use it. I think it's more user friendly, and like it has a brand of its own. It's like it also, like, being in the US and like having lived in the US for short periods, I have gotten used to the way that people pay each other with Venmo. And I think it's like mostly a young thing. But I think what happened in Venezuela was that the people who had dollars were the slightly older people that maybe don't trust the Venmo brand, and they trust the bank's brand. And because Zelle doesn't have I think now they have an app of their own, but it's not very popular. I think the whole premise of Zelle was use your online banking system to transact with other banks for free. And so I, as a person who's like 45 or older, feel much more confident logging into my bank and you seeing the familiar interface that I'm used to, seeing the logo of my bank, where I've always stored my money, where I trust, and then using the bank's systems to transact with other banks or with other people. And I can do it easily through Zelle because you only require a mobile phone or an email address. So if I have that access to that bank account, I think it's about that. I think it's about the branding. It's about the way that it's become reliable. And now it's a network effect. And now even young people are signing up for Zelle accounts, and they are using Zelle to pay each other and to pay in restaurants. And, this is like obviously a very upper middle class phenomenon in Venezuela right now, and then it's relatively recent that people have started to take up Zelle payments, and it's because of what we were discussing, that there's no longer that fear of using the dollar, be it digital or physical.
I think that's the most praise I've ever heard for Zelle in my life.
I mean, it works. It works well. I know that some Venezuelans have had problems with their accounts because, I mean, we have to remember that Zelle is still subject to the U.S. banking system, of course, and there is over-policing and over-compliance, things that are going on in there. And even though, of course, I wholly support sanctioning individuals who are morally corrupt and who have stolen from Venezuela's, resources, and I support, we should punish those people, and I think sanctions are a very effective way to punish them. And so I would not endorse, transacting with people who have had that like illegitimate access to funds, and I think they it's a complex subject. We can get on topic of sanctions if you want, but I think that the reason why Zelle accounts have started, like, people have started to become nervous about who they transact with. I think it's not healthy, and the reason is because there are sanctions in the individuals, and you can never really know for sure how many degrees of separation there are between you and the sanctioned individual. And if you conduct a transaction with your friend of your friend of your friend is somehow tied to a sanctioned individual, then you might be in trouble for association where you maybe don't know about it. And so there's no transparency in how the banking system works and how the banking police works. So I think it's a very unhealthy thing. Like, people are starting to be suspicious of paying each other with Zelle in some cases. If you are in an environment where, I don't associate myself with, people who have stolen from my country. And so I feel pretty confident about using Zelle in Venezuela in places, where I kind of know who the owner is. I've heard good things about it, but you can never rely on this intuition alone, because you might think that this place comes from clean money, and it turns out later there was an investigation and it showed that it was tied to some chavismo links, and then you actually transacted with a state like individual that was sanctioned, right? So this panic, this idea that you can never know when you're going to be cut off from your access to banking in the US is something that's terrifying, right? And so this is, again, where censorship-resistant systems come into the action and actually are very interesting. And
that's such an interesting phenomenon. I mean, this notion of guilt by association, even if it's 3 steps removed, definitely reminds me of the kind of chain analysis issue of taint in Bitcoin. But here we have it as a function of the fact that there are sanctions in the U.S. banking system against certain Venezuelan individuals. So now everyone is suspicious of everyone if they're using that U.S. banking system. And how did they, for the most part, I guess you're saying this is the middle number class, how did they get access to the U.S. banking system in the first place, given that it's closed right now?
It used to be a lot easier to open accounts in the U.S. I mean, I myself opened an account in the U.S. when I was 21, and I just didn't think about it. I was just traveling. I wasn't even going to live there. I was in college in Venezuela, and we went for a trip to visit family. And, we had the opportunity. We just walked into a bank branch, and I opened my account as a tourist, and it was easy. This is 2011, I think. And so, it's if you can travel to easy, if you can get a US visa and go there, and, why not? It's an account that you have. You have to keep a minimum balance. I think back then it was like $1,500, which was not that much. So my parents put it in there, and I just didn't touch the money, and it was my savings. I had that money, and I had my foot in a financial system that they perceived as more stable, and rightly so. And a lot of people did this, and this was like a very normal thing to do, and it relates to the fact that the U.S. banking system is rock solid, or relatively compared to Venezuela, of course. And, people had this idea that saving dollars was a good thing. So why not do it?
That makes sense. So the fact that it was relatively open meant that if you had the affluence and ability to travel abroad, you could effectively get a piece of the U.S. banking system.
Yeah, and again, Venezuela was mostly a country of middle-class people that could afford
Sure.
to go abroad and could, open accounts. You didn't have to own a business you didn't even have to have, $100,000 in assets to travel to the U.S. and do this. Like you could do this on a salary of $2,000 a month or so. It wasn't a big deal.
So on the topic of local Bitcoins, you touched on it earlier. A lot of Bitcoiners have become interested in this. They look at the local Bitcoins data because there's actually reasonably good data. You have it on Matt Alborg's site, on CoinDance. Obviously, it doesn't capture every point of ingress and egress for Bitcoin into Venezuela, but I guess it's maybe directionally accurate.
Right.
And
so.
Lots of people cheerlead it. They say, well, this is evidence that Venezuela is adopting Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess the reality is maybe a little more nuanced. So it seems that a lot of the usage of local Bitcoins, it uses Bitcoin as kind of a bridge currency or a pass-through currency to import dollars into the country. Is that an accurate way to describe it?
Yes, either to import dollars or for remittances. I think also if you're in Colombia, you can buy Bitcoin here and you can sell it in Venezuela. And that's a way that you can transform your Colombian pesos into bolivars. You use Bitcoin as an intermediary currency. And people do this in Peru, they do it in Chile, they do it in Argentina, they do it in Mexico. And you don't, yeah, it is a good conduit for converting into bolivars, because remember that the banking system in Venezuela, the banks in Venezuela have not been talking to banks abroad since 2003. You can't just send a wire into a Venezuelan account. It doesn't exist, or it doesn't work. So to get money into the country and to get money out of the country, like let's say if you are getting paid, or like if you're mining Bitcoin, for example, and you are earning some of your money in Bitcoin, then you can use local Bitcoins to convert that part of that Bitcoin to bolivars for your local expenses, and then maybe you have a bank account abroad in Europe, let's say, and you just use Bitcoin to convert then again to euros. So I don't think there's a lot of people that are holding Bitcoin or using Bitcoin as a savings mechanism, like long term. There are certainly people that are, and we actually at the Open Money Initiative, when we did the research last year, we spoke with a young woman from my university who became a Bitcoin miner and was saving, because she didn't have a bank account abroad. Her parents hadn't taken her abroad and then opened her account, and the family just didn't have a way to access outside monetary systems. So she was the banker of the family. And the way that she stored money was in just using straight Bitcoin. And she knew that it was volatile, but it was less volatile than the Bolivar. So she had her savings there. But I think most people, what they use Bitcoin for is they have a hedged position, they have a rational position on Bitcoin, and they have other assets. And they use Bitcoin as working capital to turn Bolivars into other currencies and other currencies into Bolivars.
And so the main transactors on local Bitcoins, are those specialized entities? Are those the equivalent of OTC desks that bundle up many transactions?
Yeah, either one-man operations or OTCs that work in some group capacity. I've heard there's a lot of Chinese immigrants that use local Bitcoins, and there are some accusations by other traders that they've taken over the market and now they're manipulating price and so on. I have no way to check that, but there are certainly, if you go to local Bitcoins Venezuela, there are a lot of users that you can check their interface in which they access local Bitcoins. It's in simplified Chinese, so this means that they are probably Chinese and they have ties with mainland China. They have plus 86 phone numbers that are verified, so this is another tie to mainland China. So this is kind of intriguing to me and something that I want to research more about, because I was growing up in Valencia, where there's a big Chinese community. My best friend growing up was Chinese, and he's from Hong Kong, right? And so I'm more familiar with Cantonese immigrants to Venezuela, but I wasn't aware that there was a number of people, maybe more in Caracas, where I didn't grow up in Caracas. I was just in university there. So there's maybe more people that have ties with continental China that are conducting and trade with Venezuela through local Bitcoins. And I think there are some WeChat groups where they trade and so on. And this is something that I want to do a little bit more digging about. This is something that I know that is, a subset of the traders are Chinese, and a subset of the traders are, just regular Venezuelans, from all over the world. Again, we were kind of a nation of immigrants in South America, when, times were good. My grandparents are from Spain. There are people from Italy, from Lebanon, from China, from all kinds of places. So they're a very diverse society. So there must be a whole host of people there in local Bitcoins and everywhere they're transacting. But I think, speaking about the way that they organize, I think there are communities, there are sub-communities of these groups, and some of them trade offline, like they don't want to pay the 1% that local Bitcoins charges. So once they establish a reputation, that they establish trust, they just move it to a Telegram group or a WhatsApp group or whatever. And it's very hard to investigate what's really going on here. And like traders don't like to talk a lot because like what they're doing is kind of a gray legal area, which in Venezuela it's not illegal to do this. But they want to protect their business, and it's understandable. But I think that to answer your question, I don't think it's actually retail users that are buying and selling Bitcoin in Venezuela, just using local Bitcoins per se. It's just people who are more accustomed to handling Bitcoin and are more professional about it that are using it, and they're using it to provide services to other people, like people who want to send remittances, or people who want to, let's say maybe businessmen who want to take their money out and they just don't care how it gets done, and they just use local Bitcoins providers because they'll happily take their bolivars and they'll put them in a bank account in Panama, and they use Bitcoin as a conduit. So I think that's what's going on. It's more a professional phenomenon than a personal one.
That's fascinating, and that's also what I suspected because, I think the local Bitcoins interface isn't too difficult, but, Bitcoin itself is still a fairly complex technology and sort of intimidating, so on. So I was a little skeptical that we just had, lots and lots of retail users using it. So it seems like it's more sophisticated entities. Yeah. Are there other platforms that have usage? Because local Bitcoins is not the only P2P exchange, fiat on-ramp platform. I think you have Paxful, you have HODL. Are there any other exchange technologies that have uptake there?
I know that HODL had on offer to Venezuelan traders that they would waive their fees, or they would reduce their fees. But I don't know if that's taken off. I haven't kept track of the different platforms lately. I know that Paxful has been picking up in other countries. I'm not so sure that in Venezuela it's been the case. I think local Bitcoin still remains the place where people meet, and the place if you don't have a reputation, if you don't have a group, that you can start as a trader there. But I think, it's an open question for me whether most of the Bitcoin trade in Venezuela happens through local Bitcoins or outside, because we see 5 million in volume every week in local Bitcoins, but what is the real volume of Bitcoin transactions in Venezuela? I have no way of estimating. I don't know if it's a lot higher than local Bitcoins or it's a lot lower, or it's just a little bit more than what local Bitcoins volumes is. I don't know.
On the topic of value, so that is your startup that you work for, and is it a remittance app? Do you use Bitcoin in any way?
Yes. So we are providing a retail service for people who want to move money from Colombia to Venezuela. Colombia is the country that has received the most Venezuelan immigrants, in the whole world, because we're right next, and Colombia has been incredibly kind and generous to Venezuelans. We used to be very welcoming of Colombians as well when Venezuela was booming and Colombia was going through a period of violence. So they are reciprocating, and I think it's beautiful. We are sister nations in many ways, so I am really humbled by the way Colombia has been behaving towards Venezuelans. And there's about, I think, 3 million people that are from Venezuela that are here. There's more people coming in every day, and many of them are struggling to get by. And I think that as soon as they get a foot in the economy, as soon as they can get a job, and many people in Venezuela are highly skilled, relatively to maybe some rural Colombians or some Colombians that are here that have had it, relatively good, and now Venezuelans are willing to do more things and for lower pay, which is something that is very common in immigration phenomena. And so we are seeing that people in Venezuelan immigrants in Colombia, as soon as they get their stuff together, they want to send money to their family, of course, because their families are struggling really hard. And the way to do it traditionally has been to go through a black market. So they try to find a trader that has some roots in the Colombian banking system, or can receive pesos, and they have also ways to move money inside Venezuela, because again, this is all like a Hawala type system, because there are no wires coming into Venezuela. Western Union doesn't really work in Venezuela. Well, technically it does work, but it's very cumbersome, and they use official rate, which was really bad for a long time. So it's a very complex system. So people start for many years, the way to send money has been to go to a money trader. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of scams going around. There's a lot of people that are untrustworthy. So what we do at Value is to send money from Colombia to Venezuela in a more institutionalized way. We're a company, we're legally, constituted here in Colombia. And the way we operate is we receive money from Colombia, from mostly Venezuelan immigrants who want to send money back home. And this is a very small amounts of money. Like the average ticket we process is $20 around that. So we receive money. There's 20,000 locations where we can receive money from. And this is part of a network called Efecti and another network called Baloto. These are places where you can just physically go, like they're kiosks, and you can go take physical cash with you, because the Colombian banking system is very closed to foreigners. And it has huge costs, so people don't want to open accounts here in Colombia. So they mostly get paid in cash, and they have their cash. They take their cash to these kiosks, and they send it to us through a ticket that we generate. We have a mobile app, so we generate a ticket for them, and the ticket says how much they should pay, and like there's no commission that is charged there. Everything is charged in the exchange rate. So it's a very convenient service. You can go and you take from 20,000 pesos, which is about $6. $7, and you can take it to these kiosks, and the money shows up in Venezuela. And the way that it works is we with those pesos we buy Bitcoin, right? And then we sell it in Venezuela. And that way we can move money very quickly and very efficiently. And this is something that is could be a good business model. It is a Y Combinator backed startup. And we're excited about what we're doing, and we want to move on to the next phase, which is to help people store more of their value in a digital form. So if people would be able to send money in dollars, for example, or something that is denominated in dollars, then they could both save. If the families is here in Colombia, they could save money here, and they could send money to Venezuela. And then as long as we can keep that liquid, as long as we are, a trustworthy company that is responsible about the way that we are handling people's money, and that can ensure that there's liquidity. And, with Bitcoin, we don't have the problem because there's plenty of liquidity for the amount that we're moving today. But, if you have a new asset and you have something that kind of has to resemble the US dollar, we have to, really make sure that we can turn this, digital currency that, is like the dollar into bolivars, and we have to have the value proposition clear. So it's a very big challenge that we're taking on, and we're still deciding like launch dates and then when or where it's going to be deployed first, like if we're going to limit the number of users. There's all these parameters that we're working with, because we want to be responsible, we want to do the right thing, we want to provide an actually very reliable and trustworthy service. So it's something that's very exciting.
That's really, really cool to hear. And so I guess your main criterion for selecting a bridge currency is liquidity. And in that respect, Bitcoin being quite entrenched and being fairly liquid on both sides, I guess you have a local exchange in Venezuela or in Colombia. Yeah. So your choice of Bitcoin wasn't just ideological.
No, absolutely not.
It was the best tool for the job in that case.
Yeah, I arrived at Value, started working with them in August of last year, and they already had their app. They were already working with Bitcoin before I even got involved. And I know that they're not ideological, and this is one of the things that I like about the team, is that we're very pragmatic, and we're doing things that work, and we're putting the user first. We are thinking about the person and the family that needs to send money home. How do we get that money moving safely and quickly and reliably? And how do we become a trustworthy company, both for people who live in Colombia and want to send money, and now more and more so for people that live in Venezuela and want to transact in another system that is not controlled by whatever authoritarian government might be in Venezuela or elsewhere.
And so the because you're dealing with three currencies ultimately. So you have on the Colombia side, you have the peso, then you have whatever the bridge currency is, and then you have to turn it into bolivars, I guess.
Right.
And due to that, you need something that's liquid on both sides. So I guess that is a hindrance for potentially using dollars or a stable coin, for instance, as the intermediate currency, because there is no stable coin with that accumulated liquidity.
Yeah. So that's one of the challenges we're taking on. I think it's possible. I think it's possible to open it up, at least, limited at first, or, we have to be, well, of course we want to grow fast. We're a startup and we want users and all of that. But I think that, providing a reliable service is number one in my book. And especially, if you're going to be a fintech company, that needs to be the case. And you have to show people that they can trust you when they've been let down by governments, by institutions, by, collapse of the economy and so many things. So I think we really want to do things differently. And it's a big challenge that we have to how do we ensure liquidity? But I think there are ways to do it. Like if you have Bitcoin and Bitcoin inverse futures, or, perpetual swaps, there are some financial engineering that you can do as long as you have the right expertise. And, Abra was doing this. Like they had a synthetic dollar that worked pretty well. They just kind of abandoned it because they moved on to other business models. But I was a big fan of the way that they were doing this, and I spoke with Bill a couple times and was inspired by this. So I think that there are ways that we can do it, tapping into local liquidity pools and also global liquidity pools, because you can access, we are a U.S. company again, because we were backed by Y Combinator, so we can access, let's say, BitMEX or Deribit or other exchanges that are global in nature, and we can combine. We know that Bitcoin is relatively liquid in Venezuela and Colombia up to a certain point, and so we can move that amount of money. But in order for us to move dollars, we also need to ensure that the other thing that we buy that offsets the exposure to Bitcoin is also liquid. But there are places where we can do this. So it is definitely possible, and it's something that we're working very actively on.
And so another project they were involved with is this nonprofit called the Open Money Initiative. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we started Open Money Initiative. It was Jill Carlson, Jamal Montesor, and I, and we worked with James Downer last year to do field research into Venezuela, and we actually were mostly in Colombia, talking to Venezuelan people, and most of the things that I've learned that I'm talked about here, I learned both from being Venezuelan and from having that background, but also from deeply studying how people are using money today and speaking with people from different backgrounds, from people from, that have migrated and people who have stayed and so on. And so this is, something that we pitched to the crypto industry last year, and we got some very generous backing by the Zcash Foundation, ECC, the Interchain Foundation, Stellar. We were also supported by Human Rights Foundation. So we had a lot of very good partners, and we conducted this deep study into how people use money in Venezuela, and we want to expand to other closed societies, so other closed economies. And it's something that is very much on my mind. It's something that I actively I'm continuing to pursue. It's just that the startup life is really tough. It's hard to maintain both things at the same time, but it's something that I believe in the long run. I think there needs to be kind of this voice for, conducting proper design research, and how do we serve people that live in closed societies and closed economies, and how does the crypto industry actually provide value to the people who need it the most. And I think the people who need it the most are people who live in closed economies like Venezuela, perhaps like Iran, perhaps like Cuba, perhaps like, China potentially could become something like that. They already have capital controls, and China is a massive, world power now. And so this is only going to become more relevant as countries issue their own CBDCs and people start experimenting with closed money systems. And I think we want to emphasize the importance of keeping things open, of providing freedom to people. And in that regard, we share a lot of values with the Human Rights Foundation. Like we stand against authoritarianism, and we stand against economic closure. So I think it's something that we want to influence policy around it. We want to continue doing work, deep work with communities, want to study how people use money in other places. And we want to help startups. So part of what I'm doing here at Value is directly, or maybe all of it, is directly contributing to the mission of the Open Money Initiative of providing those tools to people to be able to be in control of their money and be able to access open money systems.
And on a last note, I think we have to address this. So there are a lot of cryptocurrencies that talk about banking the unbanked as part of their teleology, their purpose. Yeah. And I always find it incredibly contrived, to be frank, because there's so many mental hurdles. Yeah, for sure it is. There's so many mental hurdles involved with adopting a new cryptocurrency. Even Bitcoin's been around for 11 years. It's quite challenging for users to start thinking about value as a string of information which they need to keep a secret, and they have to self-custody, and also for it to be denominated in this new unit of account, which is fluctuating all the time. So even Bitcoin has all these enormous challenges crossing that threshold. It seems very unlikely that a smaller or newer upstart cryptocurrency would have a shot. So what do you make of all these, the Dashes of the world, the Omiscos, the Nanos, all of these that their value proposition is this appeal to quote unquote banking the unbanked and facilitating transactions in the developed world, and they often, will make reference to Venezuela. Is this just completely empty rhetoric, or is there something? Are they actually making progress?
So I know that many people that are working on these projects have very good intentions, but good intentions don't make good products or necessarily, or good experiences. So I think what these companies need to do is to find niches, very small, much smaller niches. And actually, if they're going to focus on Venezuela, okay, let's do it. So take the example of Value. Value is actually just focusing on Venezuela at the moment because it's where it makes sense. And we're not ideological about using Bitcoin or this or that or DAI or whatever, but we're just looking for what works. And I think that's important to keep in mind. If you have vested interest in a cryptocurrency that already exists or that you imagine to be the best it could be, then you're going to make compromises that will not serve your users and will not serve the purpose of banking the unbanked. So I think starting with the premise of, let's start, trying to push nano adoption here or dash adoption there, I think it doesn't generally work because you already have something that you want to, force people into, rather than starting with what people want, which in our case is people want dollars. So how do we give digital dollars to people? Okay, so we have different ways to do that. And it is a very YC ethos, thing that I think they got right. There's very, the companies that make it in the world, or the organizations that are effective, I think need to address the real needs of people, and they need to be serious about it. And it can't be just rhetoric and say, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that, we're gonna have the best network, it's gonna be 1,000 TPS, and whatever. It has to be much more focused work, much more focused research, and the resources need to be, of course, like developing a protocol is very important, but you can't develop it, in a lab, in a very tight environment. You have to iterate, and you have to, do a little bit more research on how, who you're going to serve. And I think in that regard, for example, the Electric Coin Company has done good work in this. They've tried to develop go-to-market strategies and find out where there's more need for privacy, or there's more perceived need for privacy, because we all need privacy. And so that's people that I've worked with that I think are fantastic. And I know that there are some very well-intentioned people in this space that want to do this and want to help people, but I think we have to get close to the people that we want to serve. And if you want to help Venezuela, come to Venezuela or come to Colombia and try to do things from here, at least for a while, and see what you learn, and then start iterating on it. I think that's just the answer.
That makes sense. In terms of so lots of Bitcoiners, lots of listeners are very sympathetic to the plight of Venezuela, of course. As a formerly middle income country, which through disastrous monetary policy has fallen on hard times, what would you recommend in terms of the best ways for Bitcoiners to support not only your work, but the economic liberalization of Venezuela?
Well, I think there's, Bitcoiners are very diverse. I think, Bitcoin whales, people who have a lot of holdings and they don't know what to do with it. I think investing in companies like this is a good way to do work and to support us, and also give us advice about, if you're very knowledgeable about the protocol, the way it works and the way it can help, teach us about it. And we already know a bit about Bitcoin, and we know we use it for a very good reason, which is, liquidity. And as we are also fans of Bitcoin in other ways. I was mentioning just in the beginning of the podcast that I like the way that the monetary policy has been stable, and the community is very strict about its values, and I value that a lot. I appreciate that. So come to us, talk to us. Let's see if we can work together by co-investing or technical help. There's a lot we can do with more Bitcoin, or let's try to push, if Bitcoin is going to be our liquid, the currency that we depend on for liquidity, then let's formalize strategies around how do we get more Bitcoin liquidity in the country, because at some point local Bitcoin is going to run out of liquidity, and we are not near that point yet, but it's something that it's a challenge for the future. So how do we make sure that we still are able to use it, and it's a network that is reliable, and we can use it to send money in and out, no matter what happens, in the political world. Like if the government wants to ban this at some point, or if they want a cut of this, like how do we work so that we are, not a part of that, not something we're not forced into doing things. And I think Bitcoin is good for that. Bitcoin is good for freedom, and that's what I would say.
Are there specific nonprofits that you would recommend? I know there's a few that are active in Venezuela, obviously, the Open Money Initiative being one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the Open Money Initiative, we typically, what we do is we fundraise for specific projects. At the moment, we are producing like lightweight research, and since I'm more focused in value, and Jill and Jamal are also doing other things that are related to financial inclusion and all these world, but like we want to come together again soon and do more projects. So we stay tuned for that, for subscribe to our Medium. We're probably going to have other ways to reach out to the community, so stay tuned on that. I think that if you want to help Venezuelans, like provide humanitarian relief support, that's something that's very different from the kind of research that we do. I would recommend Bitcoin for Venezuela initiative that's run by Randy Brito, and they have like a way to turn Bitcoin into food, essentially, and they have a treasury, they maintain the funds there, and they are very consistent about posting pictures, protecting the privacy of the people involved, and they receive donations from all over the world, from Bitcoiners all over the world, and they are good at charitable work, like regular charitable work. The thing is that they are also good at getting Bitcoin in, because I have tried to help other charitable organizations to accept Bitcoin and to use it and to turn it into food. And it's challenging, because you typically need a person or two in the organization that get it and that know how to use local Bitcoins to turn it, like to go in and out. So I think working with these orgs that are already established, that are, in the Charity Navigator, they don't show up, and we can't really assess, how much more effective can you be at the moment. But I think we can help them be more effective. So like both technical help to them, the people from the regular NGO work, if they want to work with them, that would be, I think, amazing. And regular just donations. If you what you want to donate is Bitcoin, I think this organization in particular is good.
Alejandro, you've been extremely generous with your time and very forthcoming in terms of untangling these quite complex issues. Where can people follow you and follow your work?
Well, so I'm on Twitter. My handle is ALEGW, and that's mostly where I post.
Okay, well, thank you so much. This has been absolutely fascinating. I've always wanted to talk to folks on the ground. You've been very helpful in the past, explaining to me how exactly these things works, and what local Bitcoins is being used for. I think this is going to be extremely educational for our listeners too. There's so many myths, about Venezuela and very little in terms of, genuine information from practitioners. So I just want to thank you again. This has been absolutely fascinating.
No, thank you, Nick, for your time and for giving me a platform. And again, I would recommend you stay tuned with the Open Money Initiative. We have more stuff coming. And, especially, Peter McCormack has just been in Venezuela. I think dispelling these myths is important. There are some really good people in the space that are trying to do this. I can think of Lee Kuen, for example. She always posts about Iran and about, sex workers and, the different demographics that use cryptocurrency for one reason or another. There are a lot of myths around them, and we should try to understand them better. And I think following good journalism in the space and good research in the space, be it the Open Money Initiative or elsewhere, I think is a really, really good way to move forward.
Totally. Well, I can't say I'm a journalist per se, but I'm happy to, give light to these narratives and these voices. So thanks again, man. I really, really appreciate it. This has been a great conversation.